the journey. Oh, and I ask that you would like and subscribe to me, to my channel. Like and subscribe, please, I ask. So right now, this is the journey. He said, I already shared with you the beginning of that journey that happened on November 22nd, 1998. That was the night I was catapulted into the very pit of hell. My point of arrival was a cell that was approximately 15 feet high by 10 feet wide with a 15-foot depth. With its walls of rough stone and rigid bars on the door, I felt as though I was in a temporary holding area, a place where a prisoner would await his final hours before meeting a far more terrifying destiny. Isaiah 24, verse 22 says, And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison. King James Version. Emphasis added. Proverb 7:27 refers to chambers of death in hell. As I lay there on that floor of that cell, I felt extremely weak. I noticed that I had a body, one that appeared just as it is now. Lifting my head, I began to look around. Immediately, I realized that I was not alone in this cell. I saw two enormous beasts, unlike anything I had ever seen before. These creatures were approximately 10 to 13 feet tall. These towering beasts were far, far beyond intimidating. It is one thing to be threatened by someone much taller than you, but these creatures were not of this natural world. I recognized that they were entirely evil, and they were gazing at me with pure, unrestrained hatred, which completely paralyzed me with fear. Evil and terror stood before me. Those creatures were intensely concentrated manifestation of those two forces. John Piper said, I know of no one who has ever overstated the terror of hell. We are meant to tremble and feel dread. We are meant to recoil from the reality, not by denying it, but by fleeing from it into the arms of Jesus, who died to save us from it. I still had no idea where I was, and I felt utterly panicked. Although I had no point of reference, no familiarity with anything I was experiencing, and no understanding of how I got there, still I was faced with the unimaginable reality that a torturous death seemed certain. The creatures weren't animals, but they weren't human either. Each giant beast resembled a reptile in appearance, but took on human form. The beast's arms and legs were unequal in length, out of proportion, without symmetry. The first one had bumps and scales all over its grotesque body. It had a huge protruding jaw, gigantic teeth, and large sunken-in eyes. This creature was stout and powerful, with thick legs and abnormally large feet. It was pacing violently around the cell like a caged bull, and its demeanor was extremely ferocious. The second beast was taller and thinner, with very long arms and razor-sharp fins that covered its body. Protruding from its hands were claws that were nearly a foot long. Its personality seemed different from the first being. It was certainly no less evil, but it remained rather still. I could hear the creatures speaking to one another, although I could not identify what language it was. Somehow, I could understand their words. They were awful words, terrible, blasphemous language that spewed from their mouths, expressing extreme hatred for God. Suddenly, they turned their attention to me They looked like hungry predators staring at their prey. I was terrified, like an insect. Look at this book so you can read it better. Like an insect. You could probably read this yourself. But anyway, I was terrified, like an insect in a deadly spider's web. I felt helpless, trapped, and frozen with fear. I knew I had become the object of their hostility, and I felt a violent, evil presence, as I had never felt before, and greater than anything I could imagine. They possessed a hatred that far surpassed any hatred a person could have. And now, that hatred was directed straight at me. I couldn't identify what these beasts were yet, but I knew they meant me harm. I wanted desperately to get up and run, but as I lay on that wretched cell floor, I noticed that I had absolutely no strength in my body. I could barely move. Why didn't I have strength? I felt so defenseless. Psalm 88, verse 4 says, I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that has no strength. King James Version. Emphasis added. I knew it was much more than physical weakness I was feeling. Indeed, it was weakness of every form. I was mentally and emotionally drained, even though I had only been there a few minutes. Most of us have experienced a loss of strength and energy after intense weeping, emotional distress, or grief. After a time of healing, we regain that strength, though it may take years. However, at that moment, I felt that there would never be a time for recuperating from the literal weight that had fallen upon me, a weight of hopeless despair. The two more creatures came into the cell, and I had the feeling that I was being sized up and that my torment would be their amusement. As they entered, suddenly a light vanished. The light vanished. It became absolutely pitch black. I had no idea why the sudden and intense darkness had begun, but I sensed that the atmosphere had now returned to its normal state of darkness. Lamentations chapter 3, verse 6 states, He has set me in dark places like the dead of long ago. Emphasis added. One of the creatures picked me up. The strength of the glass, or the strength of the beast was amazing. Was comparable to the weight of a water glass in its hand. Mark chapter 5, verse 3 and 4 describes a man possessed with a demon with these words. No one could bind him, not even with chains. The chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Instinctively, I knew that the creature holding me had strength approximately 1,000 times greater than a man. I could not explain how I perceived that bit of information. Then the beast threw me against the wall. I crumpled onto the floor. It felt as though every bone in my body had been broken. I felt pain, but it was also as if the pain was being softened somehow. I knew I did not experience the full brunt of the pain. I thought, how was it blocked? The second beast, with its razor-like claws, had sharp protruding fins, then grabbed me from behind in a bear hug. As it pressed me into its chest, its sharp fins pierced my back. I felt like a rag doll in its clutches in comparison with his enormous size. He then reached around and plunged his claws into my chest and ripped them outward. My flesh hung from my body like ribbons as I fell again to the cell floor. These creatures had no respect for the human body. How remarkably it is made. I have always taken care of myself by eating right, exercising, and staying in shape. But none of that mattered as my body was being destroyed right before my eyes. I knew I could not escape this torture via death, for not even that was an option. Death penetrated me, but eluded me. The creatures seemed to derive pleasure in the pain and terror they inflicted upon me. Psalm 116, verse 3, King James Version says, "The sorrows of death compassed me, and the pains of hell gat hold upon me. I found trouble and sorrow. Oh, how I yearned for death, but there would be none. I pleaded for mercy, but they had none. Absolutely no mercy. They seemed to be incapable of it. They were pure evil. No mercy existed in that place. Mercy is from God in heaven. The mental anguish I felt was indescribable. Asking for mercy from such evil only seemed to heighten their desire to torment me more. I was conscious of the fact that there was no fluid coming from my wounds. No blood, no water, nothing. At this time, I did not stop to wonder why. I was extremely nauseated from the terrible foul stench coming from these creatures. It was absolutely disgusting, foul, and rotten. It was by far the most putrid smell I had ever encountered. If you could take every rotten thing you could imagine, such as an open sewer, rotten meat, spoiled eggs, sour milk, dead and rotting animal flesh, and sulfur, and magnify 1,000 times, you might come close. This is not an exaggeration. The odor was extremely toxic, and that alone should have killed me. Instinctively, I just knew that some of the things I was experiencing were 1,000 times worse than what would be possible on the Earth's surface, such as the odors mentioned, the strength of the demons, the loudness of the screams, the dryness, and the loneliness I felt. Somehow, I managed to move a bit and drag myself across the ground toward the barred door. I couldn't see, but I remembered the direction of the door that had been